Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Well, Jake Tapper broke ranks on CNN over the weekend. It's pretty flimsy, but this is what constitutes breaking ranks from the orthodoxy of the D.C. press corps. This during an interview with outgoing Congressman Joe Kennedy III about Hunter Biden. I thought that was the name that shall not be spoken.
You know, it's true that there's no evidence of any wrongdoing by Vice President Biden or that Hunter Biden broke any laws at all. But frankly, it does stink that Hunter Biden got this contract with no expertise in the energy sector. And he's already said, basically, he probably got that money, which was significant, because of his connection with his father, the vice president at the time, who was also in charge of Ukraine at the time. Do you think that future presidents and vice presidents should say, my relatives cannot cash in any way on their connection to me?
Look, I think it is certainly, I think it is.
Well said, Joe. Good response. A little tongue-tied?
Words are hard.
Does the Biden ink have your tongue? Yeah, well, there is an emoluments clause that sort of speaks to that. But I mean, it's less a law than it is a commitment, what Jake Tapper is referring to. Something else, too, just bizarre as this Biden ink story gets more and more bizarre. And Hunter Biden's laptops continue to turn up in unusual places. NBC News reported that a device belonging to Hunter Biden was taken into custody by the DEA in February while executing a search warrant in the Massachusetts office of celebrity psychiatrist Keith Abloh, who had his medical license suspended after facing allegations of sexually exploiting patients and illegally diverting prescription drugs. Abloh has not been charged with any crime. And NBC reported that Hunter Biden was not a target of the search of the investigation. His lawyer ultimately got that laptop back, but
why was it there in the first place?
Well, right.
And he's that careless that he takes a laptop into a store in Wilmington, Delaware, and then just doesn't bother to pick it up because apparently it had some water damage.
Well, here's the thing. Well, that's the other one.
Right, the first one, but then the second one ends up in this celebrity psychiatrist's office.
Keith Abloh, so he's accused of diverting prescription drugs. Hunter Biden, a known addict, his laptop is found in Keith Abloh's office. Right, nobody's been charged with anything, but it certainly does raise questions if the media was curious about such matters. Of course, we know that they're not. But, and the other thing, Jake Tapper's whole, there's been no charges of wrongdoing. I know there's been no questions. There's an investigation in money laundering that started last year that hasn't been completed. But as we know, the FBI doesn't do civil investigations, Jake. They do criminal investigations. And there's also mounting evidence that should prompt more questions and more inquiry, and maybe an investigation that broadens into include other members of the Biden family if it hasn't already. This whole, nobody's been charged with anything, so we don't have to pay attention to it, is a pretty unusual standard for the press corps. For more on all things Biden Inc. related, we're pleased, and a few other topics, too. We're pleased to be joined again by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you.
What about this, the questions that one should ask when you have federal law enforcement agencies, the FBI money laundering investigation, the DEA raiding the celebrity psychiatrist's office, and all roads lead back to the Biden family, in addition to what a former Navy officer, Tony Bobulinski, presented in terms of evidence and perspective last week. This is not an important law enforcement matter. This shouldn't be pressed for questions, for answers to questions.
Yeah, so my areas are national security and foreign policy. So this is not necessarily an issue where I'm a deep expert. I'm just, as a citizen, just struck by the disparity in the coverage in the press, contrasting it with how people looked at the Steele dossier and the many investigations into the president. I mean, here we have a candidate for president who theoretically ought to have at least equal scrutiny with what other candidates face, and it almost seems the equivalent of a media blackout.
Well, and what we know, I mean, again, if this is all authenticated, and it certainly hasn't been denied, the high-flying dealings with essentially quasi-state actors in China and Russia, communist-backed energy concerns in China, for example, as well as by extension, the state-owned energy company in Russia. It is a national security concern if the only thing that stands between those enemies of America and compromising our national security, perhaps at the highest levels, is Hunter Biden's Hunter02 password, which is the same password I have in my luggage.
Right. Well, I mean, this is what raises, if there's a potential red flag to raise. The FBI is doing a money laundering investigation. So why do you launder money? You launder money because you've gotten it in an illegal manner. And what we publicly know is much of his business was related to foreign entities, which included Russia, Ukraine, China, and other places. So that suggests if there is a predicate crime here, if this is money that was laundered, then that raises two questions: who profited by it, and also what kind of connections does that link you to, either being vulnerable to or influenced by or participating in with foreign entities. So these are all just questions. We don't have answers to any of this, but they are legitimate questions, and journalists who are supposed to investigate things, ought to look into them. And here's the difference too. There's a difference between looking into something, investigating it, and reporting on it. I mean, the problem with the Steele dossier was lots of people reported on it. Everybody, they all assumed it was true. Same thing with the allegations about that the president was impeached for Ukraine. There was very, very little actual investigative journalism, because if there had been, what it would have revealed is what the intelligence and the law enforcement community in the end revealed was that the president didn't do anything wrong. And a lot of those facts were not deeply below the surface. And so here, look, maybe they would acquit Hunter Biden if they just actually investigated. I imagine here, too, there are facts that are not deeply below the surface.
Setting aside all of the Biden Inc. business for a minute, what do we know about Joe Biden's 4 decades in public office with respect to national security policy and international relations? To answer the question, would America be safer after 4 years of Joe Biden, or would it be safer after 4 more years of President Trump, against the backdrop of Bob Gates, a former CIA director, saying that Joe Biden has been on the wrong side of virtually every national security issue in the last couple of decades, and President Trump, again, this has been underreported because of everything else going on, but the expansion of peace in Africa to the Middle East continues with diplomatic relations between now the country of Sudan and Israel being normalized.
Yeah, it's an issue worth looking at. I say this all the time. Everybody says, "Well, I'm voting on domestic issues, healthcare, jobs, COVID, or whatever." The reality is, you're voting on foreign policy because you're picking commander in chief. You're picking the world's most important statesman. So, regardless of what you think, you're voting on foreign policy. You are. What's interesting about this election is, unlike say about 2000, I guess it was 2008, where you had Obama and McCain. Neither one had any real track record as president. You're voting on what do I think they'll do. So the difference here is you actually have two candidates who've done things. And I mean, we could look at Biden's long senatorial career, but that's you're just voting and stuff. But in the 8 years he was in the Obama president, they made decisions, and almost virtually all the people associated with the Biden team are people from the Obama administration. So essentially, it's the same foreign policy team. They have an 8-year track record. This president has a 4-year track record. There is something there to contrast. I don't pick sides. I don't tell you who to vote for. I will say, objectively, take aside the orange hair and the tweeting and the screaming and the yelling and everything. If you look objectively on foreign policy, are we better off than 4 years ago? Unquestionably, the answer is yes. It's also, without question, we are better off because we fixed many of the problems that were put in place the 8 years before that, from giving Cuba a get-out-of-jail-free card and empowering a regime that's a communist socialist regime and is trying to destabilize Latin America, to the disaster of the Iran deal, to not pushing back on China, to leaving Ukraine kind of hanging in the wind. All those problems were fixed under this administration. The caliphate, which was running all over the Middle East, which was totally destroyed. Literally every bad outcome of the 8 years was turned around. So,
and remember,
that's just an objective assessment. It's not an endorsement.
Remember when President Obama said ISIS members, they just need jobs?
Right.
That was just atrocious.
And a few of the things that we talk about are how the level of global transnational terrorism has been so greatly reduced. We had these terrible, really ghastly attacks in France and Paris. But these are, relatively lone actors who can't do anything more than go out and get a machete. I mean, we were fearful of tens of thousands of foreign fighters flowing into the region, kind of completely networked with millions and millions of dollars of resources. And all that was wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, that was a pretty impressive achievement. And that's just one that I really strain to see a part of the world that isn't better off the last 4 years. And I think on the Middle East in particular, I mean, I think we are on the cusp of a transformation in that region, not just in terms of security, but in terms of economic productivity and integration and job growth. It's really some quite remarkable achievements.
With looking forward in a prospective Trump second term, if you were providing advice and counsel about the intelligence community and not specific personnel decisions, but just sort of holistically thinking about it, what are the sort of reforms? I mean, FBI Director Wray proposed a bunch of reforms earlier in this year. I don't know to the extent that some of them have been effectively implemented or what their impact has been. But what would you say in terms of perhaps the need for, to borrow a word of the cycle, systemic reforms to those institutions if they're going to reestablish some of the credibility they lost, frankly?
Well, one of the kind of the untold things is the intel community has not performed terribly badly this year. We have not had a really significant intelligence failure. On the other hand, we've had a number of intelligence tactical successes, like tracking down Soleimani. We have done a really good job pushing back on Chinese trolling and stuff. I think the challenge for the intel community is really continuing to modernize for the challenges of the 21st century. And we've got China more engaged in Africa and Latin America. We have to get better at that. So we have new challenges and new changes, and not getting distracted by the politics, because it is very clear that we've got politicians on both sides who see the intelligence community as a political tennis ball. I mean, I don't want to name anybody, but this guy that chairs the House Intelligence Committee, he does, I think, is close to a crime. I mean, literally using the intelligence community as his personal tool for advancing political agendas. And somehow we gotta get that out of the system, so these guys can just do their job, and these girls can just do their job.
Thank you for not naming Adam Schiff. We appreciate that.
I forgot his name.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks as always, Jim. Appreciate it.
Good being with you guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.